Hello, today I will be talking about Clemens Holzmeister's architectural production in Turkey. The title of my talk is Holzmeister in Turkey, 1927-1954, Producing Architecture in Early Republican Periods. I've chosen to start with two photographs of Holzmeister published in Turkish newspapers, accompanying the news that announced the construction of buildings that he designed while he was working and then also living in Turkey from 1927 to 1954. This period is formed of the early Republican decades following the foundation of the Turkish Republic in 1923, when radical changes were experienced in all aspects of social life, including architecture. The significance of Holzmeister's works in this context should be evaluated with reference to the specific conditions of a newly founded state and the role assigned to the field of architecture in the process of state formation. The foundation of the Republic signifies the attempt of the new regime to form a modern nation state. Following the initial consolidation years of the regime, it was during the late 1920s and especially the 1930s that the state attempted to ground its radical reforms to the end of modernization. In terms of architectural production and culture, the invitation to foreign and especially European architects and planners by the state from 1927 onwards seems to have been one of the initial decisive attempts of the state to create the modern built environment. Foreign designers worked in Turkey as practitioners and advisors as well as teachers. Holzmeister was one of the first European architects invited to work in the country. Okay. As Holzmeister recounted in his memoirs, in search for a specialist for the defense ministry, the Turkish delegation in Vienna, following a suggestion of the chancellor, applied to him. The decision about the invitation to him was grounded on the argument that there were no architects in the country known to have successfully constructed such grand buildings. Holzmeister initially came to the new capital Ankara in 1927, and his first design there was the project of the Ministry of National Defense building that you see here. Holzmeister continued to live in Austria, but also worked in Ankara during the 1930s. After the Nazi occupation of Austria in 1938, he chose to live in Turkey, which stayed neutral in the Second World War. Until he left Turkey in 1954, he designed 20 realized public buildings and private houses, as well as 2 stage designs and 48 unrealized projects. He also worked as advisor at the construction office in the Ministry of Public Works, and he taught architecture at the Istanbul Technical University. The period Holzmeister worked in Turkey witnessed the early phase of the Republic, when the reconstruction and recreation of the built environment was important for the emergence of a new social formation. In these early decades of the Republic, public building activity was under the supervision of official architectural offices, especially the Office of Construction and Building in the Ministry of Public Works, which also carried out design tasks. And foreign architects like Holzmeister worked as advisors to public construction in these offices. Especially the designs of public buildings in Ankara were assigned by the state to foreign architects, and it was here where a significant amount of public construction took place. Holzmeister was the most prominent architect in these terms, as he was the one to be called the official architect even, and having designed most of the significant buildings in the capital city. Ankara, as the new capital, was to be a modern, contemporary, and Western city in order to symbolize the success of the new republic and also to provide an example for the development of other cities in the country. Thus, The city began to grow rapidly with the construction of various buildings, mainly to house the governmental, administrative, legal, and economic facilities, and also the increasing number of people that began to populate the new capital. Holzmeister was actively involved in this process of modernization in Turkey, especially in Ankara. He played an important role in providing an identity to the capital city of Ankara, which he defined as once a small Anatolian town with a rich historical heritage, now developing into the capital city of Kemal Pasha's, that is the founding president Atatürk's Turkey. Following the Ministry of National Defense, Holzmeister designed other buildings for the army during the late 1920s. The one that you see here, General Staff Headquarters from 1928. Army Officers Club again in 1929, and Military School in 1930. Indeed, during the early years of the Republic, the general styling of buildings, public buildings especially, largely reflected the Ottoman imperial heritage in its use of Ottoman building elements such as large eaves, projections, and arches in traditional proportions, and of decorative elements such as classical Turkish tiles. Two buildings with the same functions of Holzmeister designs may exemplify this approach, as I show here. In contrast, Holzmeister continued to design during the late 1920s other official buildings, representative of the contemporary aim of the Republic at creating a new and modern identity for the new state. In architectural production, this necessitated to abandon references to Ottoman architecture in line with the modernization policy of the government, and instead the architecture of the Republic began to be basically shaped with modern and international forms with the use of eaveless roofs, eaveless flat roofs, plastered flat walls, horizontal masses and rounded corners, etc., and thus with simplicity and functionalism of the designs. Holzmeister's works in Turkey were the products of this transformation or modernization in architecture in line with the modernization policy of the country. Analyzing Holzmeister's designs of these public buildings in Ankara, we may say that a typical characteristic that carries the imprint of the architect is the projections, creating plasticity, three-dimensionality, and light shade effects on the facades. They may be rectangular prisms in form, T or reverse T shapes, or as a projected addition to the upper story to mark the entrance access. Holzmeister's designs were modernist indeed, in line with the expectations of the period. However, these designs were not in the avant-garde spirit of the early 20th century architectural approach, but they instead represented what we may call as a moderate or a calm, or as an architectural historian in Turkey called as tamed modernism, to represent the ideals of the state. It may be stated that the common basic feature of these buildings can be defined as a kind of classicism indeed, maybe a classical modernism freed from adornment. For example, all the buildings were always symmetrically designed, and accentuation of the center determines the axis of symmetry in all, having such a classical understanding in all. The monument, security monument that defined the border of the newly formed district of ministries in Ankara was another design of Holzmeister that has a classical and indeed monumental character, for which Holzmeister worked with Austrian sculptors Hanak and Torak. His designs for bank buildings, again in Ankara, including the central bank itself as the economic center of power, were also significant, showing the importance given to the national economic development of the new state during the early Republican periods. As the most important Austrian architect in Turkey at the time, of course, Holzmeister, the design of the Austrian embassy building was also commissioned to Holzmeister, and he chose to use traditional references here to represent Austria in another country, as you see here. At the turn of the 30s, on the other hand, Holzmeister's design for the president's house was quite representative, not only in terms of its function, but also its modern design, its modern style. In the newspaper that you see here, this building was announced as simple and in the European style. The newspaper published many interior views of the president's house, emphasizing the importance given to modernist European stylistic approach at the time. In addition to the president's house, Holzmeister also designed the most important state building in the capital, Ankara, which is the National Assembly building. The Parliament building is a clear example of Holzmeister's design approach. A competition was held to choose the project of the new Parliament building at the end of the 1930s, and 14 projects participated in the competition. 3 projects were granted the first award, among which Atatürk himself chose Holzmeister's project to be implemented. Indeed, by the end of the 30s, the general massive and monumental appearance and such high colonnaded entrances of public buildings in neoclassical understanding, as originated especially in contemporary Germany, began to affect architectural production also in Turkey. In this case, Holzmeister's design approach exhibited neoclassical and monumentalist and decorative understanding, as also seen in Europe at the end of the 1930s. Holzmeister also participated in the competition for Atatürk's mausoleum, opened right after his death in 1938. In this project, the one that you see here, traditional references to tomb architecture in the country was apparent, but it was not selected by the jury. He also designed an unrealized project for a monument in Istanbul on the Bosphorus. So there were some unrealized projects of Holzmeister as well, prepared for Turkey. And while in Turkey, Holzmeister produced not only architectural but also artistic works. He traveled around the country and drew paintings of natural and historical sites, and he also prepared stage designs, 2 examples you see here. As another significant note about Holzmeister's influence in Turkey, his role in teaching architecture should also be emphasized. Holzmeister and other foreign architects educated new generations of Turkish architects during the 1930s and 40s, and thus Holzmeister was an important actor not only in producing early Republican architecture, but also affecting the production of later periods. You see here Holzmeister with other professors at the university together with the students in the 1940s, and then having returned to Austria in 1954, Holzmeister visited Turkey for a last time in 1978 as a consultant to the planned new addition to the Parliament complex. which was for a public relations building and a religious center. This complex was designed by a former student of Holzmeister, Behruz Çinici, and you see here Holzmeister working with Behruz Çinici in his office in that year, and his visit to the parliament where he was together with Turkish architects, many of whom were his earlier students. In 2001, with the initiative of the Austrian Embassy in Turkey and the Austrian Cultural Office of Istanbul, the exhibition titled Clemens Holzmeister, an architect at turning points of history, was organized in order to honor the architect's significant role in architectural production of the country. As I noted here, this exhibition was displayed in Ankara and Istanbul, and then traveled abroad to Vienna and Sao Paulo. An edited volume was also published that included the total research results. And as you see here, I was one of the assistant editors of this study, of this research, and my presentation today indeed has taken as the basis that article that was my article that was published in this volume. From 1927 on, Holzmeister visited Turkey several times for the preparation of his designs. And then, as I mentioned, from 1938 to 1954, he lived in the country, first in Istanbul, as you see here, in Sümer Palace, and then in Ankara, his office you see here. During these years, Holzmeister witnessed the process of the foundation of a new state and the consequent developments experienced in architecture as part of this process. In those early Republican decades, the construction of a new built environment was given importance in the Republic because buildings not only house but also represent the society. Designing the buildings that were symbols of the Republic by housing the main administrative power centers of the new modern nation-state system, Holzmeister also took an active part in the political and cultural process that attempted to create a new built environment to foster the existence of a new social formation. For this reason, Holzmeister and his works are among the most important sources for a better understanding and evaluation of the history of the Republic, as well as the history of architecture in Turkey. As in the comprehensive research project that led to an exhibition and an edited volume that I mentioned, the works of Clemens Holzmeister has been widely studied and taken its significant position in the literature on Republican architecture in Turkey. And the architect is also remembered in Ankara, as you see here, as seen in the naming of a park as Holzmeister in Ankara. You see here the picture, indeed, I'm very glad to think about Holzmeister's role in Turkey once again. And thank you all for giving me this opportunity to present this influential figure to you. Thank you very much.